which of course carries the greatest authority for Christians. The third area that I think feminism is concerned about, or should be concerned about, is representation. How women are depicted, how women are represented, how women and men are depicted to each other. Or to return to that idea. The fourth area of concern is the whole question of being a body. Now, obviously, this is a topic close to John Paul II's heart, because he produced that extraordinary body of work we now call the theology of the body, which is, in his mind, a restoration of the importance of the physical fact of being a body, but also the spiritual nature of being a body. Sometimes in the past, in the preaching of the church, people had the impression that body and soul were two separate things. You had a kind of soul that rattled inside a Tupperware container, and the Tupperware container was your body. And in fact, men and women were only like Barbie and Ken. If you cut them in half, there was just plastic inside. And somewhere in there was a soul, but the soul was neutered, like a Bugs Bunny cartoon, you know, when Sylvester dies, or the Roadrunner kills for 100th millionth time, gets the coyote to fall off the edge of a cliff. A little white thing comes out of the body of the dead coyote. Soul, separate, abstract, not informing the body. So John Paul II's huge ambition was to hold new feminism in with a celebration of the body, to say the body is a sacramental form of the person, not just rubbish. Do you think our culture, for its many gyms and diets and Botoxed people, celebrates the body? I would say we're very non-feminist, very non-theology of the body at this particular time. Another area that's of importance to feminism is the idea of work and home. Now, it's interesting to note once again that in the time before the Industrial Revolution, guess what? Home was work. Home was where you worked. Whether you were religious in a convent, whether you were a person in a house or a farm, if you were a craftsperson, your work was probably just at the front of your house. And so there was not the same separation of going out to work for anyone, men or women. With the Industrial Revolution, that changed, didn't it? People had to go to a factory, had to go to a city. And that meant that women began to wonder why they were left in charge of a place with nobody in it, or if anyone was in it, it was usually people who couldn't speak very well because they were under 5. So women, I think, began to realise that they didn't have much adult company during the day, which became a difficulty sometimes. I'm not saying that women at home are in any way doing the wrong thing, but to say once upon a time women at home looking after children had other people at home to talk to. There wasn't this separation of work-life. So the new feminism asked that question. No wonder so many women after the 50s rushed out the door to get into the rat race, because at least they thought there'll be other human beings to talk to and other adults. Boy, were they wrong, by the way. They got into the workplace and found there were all kinds of dramas and very often childish behaviour that may have been done their 2-year-olds quite a deal, you know, made their 2-year-olds look quite mature. But it's true that the lack of respect, the lack of stimulation, the lack of any real challenge to some people in that home life. I'm not saying all women found that. Some women did have a life at home that they were able to foster. But you can see why the feminist idea took hold. Betty Friedan's famous book was that everybody's giving me a Hoover, they've given me a washing machine, and it's really boring here. Now, in the days, I don't know whether any of you ever read the State School Reader. There's a great book that we used to have at school called the State School Reader. It had all kinds of stories about early Australia. And one of the great stories in it is about the drover's wife. And the drover goes off out to mind his cattle, and she looks after the whole household, including the men working there. She feeds them, she kills the snakes. Life isn't boring. She has huge authority. She's running all kinds of things. She's running the economy of that household. She's looking after snakes. She's actually competing with Indiana Jones in terms of her adventures each day at school, at home. She teaches her kids, So there is a contrast. There is something that happened after that time that meant that women sometimes felt frustrated that they didn't have a meaningful contribution to make, even though they loved their children and they were caring for them. And I think the new feminism today would say, let's take that into account, but let's not, but at the same time, do what has happened with much liberal feminism, which is to say, if you're at home, you're brainless. That stereotype that women are supposed to be rebelling against. In other words, you just apply the stereotype. You've just applied a stereotype to the very women you're supposedly helping. And you judge them. And unfortunately, that is a very severe thing today. Many, many young women I know who choose to stay at home with their children are assumed to be single mothers living off the dole. Why? Because why else would you stay at home? So that's actually non-feminism applied by people who call themselves feminists. So we've got to be very careful of that kind of thing. The last area that I think the new feminism is concerned to address is life issues, the sanctity of life from either conception to death. Now, obviously, the Catholic tradition has a very strong tradition about the absolute dignity and preciousness of all lives. That's why there are so many Catholic hospitals, nursing homes, maternity hospitals, midwives, and so on. Why did Christians get drawn to those things? Because they saw the sanctity of life. So a very important part of the new feminism will have a return to the centre stage of the sanctity of life, with a difference. And the difference is this, that in each case, the sanctity of life will try to be inclusive. In other words, if a pregnant woman comes to you with a concern, you don't say, well, your child is not a human being. You say, how do we care for both of you? If a person who's stressed out because their dying Alzheimer's grandmother is quite a burden to look after, you don't say, well, let's go and ring Dr. Nitschke and it'll all be fixed. We do say, however, how do we help you who are caring? How do we get more help for you? Not how do we fix this problem by resorting to something which denies the life of a frail and failing person. You see the difference between the two approaches. So where does this all base itself? Well, one of the key ideas in the new feminism is to capture the idea of what's called the feminine genius. That is to say that, and this is based on an idea that one of the great sort of founders of new feminism, Edith Stein, the Sister Benedicta of the Cross, Carmelite nun, once a philosopher, who was executed in Auschwitz as both a nun and a Jewish woman. She said that there are three aspects to the genius of women, and this is very foundational to new feminism. This is very much part of our makeover, which Penny wanted me to speak about. How do we make over feminism so that it can be truly new, and how can it be truly inclusive so that men can cooperate in this as well? Three areas, she decided. First, to affirm women's humanity. Sounds very basic, doesn't it? But I think if you look around in our culture, very often women don't really believe that they have equal status with men. They actually don't believe that they have human dignity. They actually think it's got to be earned. And I don't know if any of you saw the girls going out to Oaks Day, but they're girls thinking they've got to earn their dignity. Not their dignity, but their place, to be desired. So they dress up as ladies, and that's the fun bit, but somewhere during the day something happens. They try so hard, they have to drink so much, they have to wear such awful shoes, they get stuck in the turf and break their ankles, that by the time they're walking home, they've lost the very thing that they've been trying to achieve. And I think that's a sad, tragic idea, that these women don't really believe that their humanity comes with who they are. The second thing that I think Edith Stein wants us to think about is to affirm the womanhood of the woman concerned. Now, that does not mean accepting a model of femininity which is stereotypical or, last of all, fluffy. You know, the kind of pink little girly thing. I say this because I was a tomboy as a little girl, and I just want to say, come on, tomboys, you are women too. What I mean by that, usually why are girls wearing trousers and rolling around? Because they want to do fun things outside. It's not because they have a role identity problem.